those numbers that certificates of ascertainment are done days, perhaps weeks later. But the bottom line is every state, after the election, no one is at a shortage to know what the state's votes are. And when you're dealing with a pool of 120, 130 million votes, it's going to be pretty clear who won an election. If there is a tied election, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. There's going to be a lot of attention paid to that state, and there's going to be no room between the press, between both sides, both party mechanisms or three-party mechanisms, whatever, for game playing. So the mechanism of our democracy, our representative republic, will force these things to happen. You go back to 2000, if there was going to be games played because of that close election and that potential issue there, don't you think a state, if states were going to play games, don't you think states would have played games there? Well, Al Gore really won the election, we're going to change our electoral votes, or we're going to do this or that. No state did that. Every state followed their law. Right. There were lawsuits, and I believe one of your slides is it's up to the courts, but if it does come to that, we have courts to do that. But we firmly believe that election officials from the county level to the canvassing boards to the secretaries of states are professionals, and they're going to do their job and live up to the mandates of their state laws.
Right, and you have to remember that in Florida, what you're talking about, it started as a state issue, right?
Right.
And it went all the way up through the state courts in Florida, and it got transcended into the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court used federal law to stop the recount because they said that they couldn't conclude the recount in time for the Safe Harbor Day. Right. Okay, so it was the federal law that confined Florida that stopped the recount. It wasn't the process by which Florida was using, which was the original challenge going up through the Florida Supreme Court. So,
but my point is that, you know, under the current system, you know, we don't see states suing each other over how they conducted their elections because they disagree with the outcome, even if it's a close election, even if there is a recount or what have you. And so I'm just wondering if that's not a red herring. We're all kind of leading ourselves on, you know, if we entered it. Now, granted, we would be in an interstate compact, there would be an additional layer of relationship between the states. So you're right. I mean, that might create that scenario, but it doesn't happen now.
It's only an agreement. Bear in mind, it's only an agreement amongst the states to award your electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. Everything that you do now at the county level, the canvassing, the certification, the Secretary of State, does not change. It only changes whereby what slate of electors is sent based on not the winner-take-all in your current state, but the winner-take-all in all 50 states. And that's, so New Mexico can't tell Florida how to run their elections. And it might be a different election. And that's where that state sovereignty, we believe, comes in and is maintained. And we believe that's a good thing. We don't want a federal election system.
But there are
administrative. Not necessarily a red herring to raise that. And I think it's, if you got something that came down to 100,000 votes, or let alone 20 or 10,000 vote difference, it's not out of the question in 130 million. I think you would have a lot of states begin to raise equal protection issues, consistency issues, whether or not felons are voting in other states, whether or not you allow certain people to vote, whether or not people showed up on time to vote, how you counted absentee ballots, provisional ballots. Yeah. I think you could have, I could see the point being raised that there would be a myriad examples of people where interested parties might get in to challenge the validity of another state's procedures.
But you got to remember the federal law still governs that if a state submits their certificate of ascertainment 6 days before the first Wednesday after the second Monday in December, they are granted the safe harbors. They've granted the safe harbor status, and their certificate of ascertainment, their canvass is deemed conclusive for purposes of that. The Electoral College will still.
Other states really objected to, you know, Florida's Supreme Court by a 4-3 vote, in which even members of the same party said we're doing something completely wrong. We're ignoring our own state law, and the states were really steamed about that. And that's one of the reasons that the national court stepped in by a 7-2 vote and said, you know, you gotta count this, you can't ignore your own state law.
Exactly, that's a good point you make, because they will, at the end of the day, do the right thing. One of the issues came up, and
And
forgive
you know
me,
what, I'm gonna just stop the conversation momentarily, and I know it's really good, but this way we can break for a second, because we've been going for 2 hours and we only have an hour left, and I want us to talk about the compact and look at the compact actually, because we haven't got to look at the compact, and a lot of these same issues